Okay, welcome back. This is the second episode of Unmissable Movies with me, Sam Cox, and my friend Steve Hayes. You there, Steve?
Hello. All right, mate.
I'm so good. Yeah, how do you feel about episode 1? I really enjoyed it.
I had a great time actually, just unpacking that movie and trying to find things in Road to Perdition that I've never really noticed before, and I was literally couldn't wait to watch the next movie, which Sam is.
This week we're looking at Moneyball, 2011 film. Last week it was interesting. Last week we talked about a gangster film that isn't really a gangster film, and this week we're talking about a sports movie that it doesn't really primarily. It doesn't feel like a sports movie. This is Moneyball, directed by Bennett Miller. Came out in 2011, and it's a film about a character I've never heard of, who's the general manager of an MLB franchise that I know very little about. And yet, this is an unmissable movie. This is just such a great film that we highly recommend and look forward to digging into over the course of the next few minutes.
Yeah, what I noticed watching it again was you don't have to rely on any sense of knowing anything about the characters. You don't really need to know much about the concept of Moneyball. And you don't really need to know a great deal about baseball because the movie's got so many layers that it's, like you say, it's beyond a straight-up sports movie. There are probably some similarities with the Mighty Ducks, would you say?
No, I wouldn't.
Think of it, Sam. You've got a failed protagonist who didn't quite make it, who goes on to do something that's
you're right.
as
No,
lesser in the sport, with a unruly group of players who go on to achieve more than anyone expected.
Pulls together this little misfit band. Now that you say it, it's screaming at me. Can't believe I missed it.
Wow.
It's not normally a go-to genre for me. This sort of the sports movie, and I think some of that's because they're usually a bit, Mighty Ducks, predictable, Disney-esque. But I think this film is much more a study in character and leadership and innovation and sort of old powers versus new powers, and so definitely. I think that's why it sort of transcends that genre. But at the same time, there are some great sport movie moments in this film. I happen to be a big fan of baseball, but I just think even if you know nothing about it, that's not going to matter.
So, Sam, for our British listeners, what is baseball?
Did you say what is baseball?
Yeah. Obviously, people know what baseball is, but explain a little. I don't really know a great deal about what's in it. What's in it that's so good to engage with?
Well, how long have we got? I mean,
okay, forget describing baseball. What's Moneyball?
So Moneyball is originally it's a book that came out around the time that this movie is set that kind of redefined ways in which to think about not just baseball but all sport, just looking at the maths and the numbers to try and do a more sort of scientific job of building teams and drafting players and that kind of stuff. So just like in any major sports franchise, you've got like the coaching system and the scouts and all of that stuff that's been going on for as old as the sport is. Yeah. And then Moneyball was this kind of revolutionary new thing. Yeah, caused a bit of a scene because baseball, it's this romantic, it's the national pastime for America and so much I think even one of the lines in this movie is about the romance of baseball. Yeah. And this whole thing kind of threatened that. And this movie that's the premise for this character study is this manager of a team on the West Coast called the Oakland A's, and they're kind of they're like a third division type of team. They're always scrappy.
Ragtag bunch.
Yeah, always kind of set against the big teams like the Yankees that have all the money. And it's a character study into this general manager who kind of has to get a little bit ruthless, to build a team that he thinks is going to work, and then he comes up against all the old guard, all the old scouts and the sort of the old way of doing things. And so that's the premise, that's the backdrop, and that's what this film is about.
Yeah, there's very much a sense in which a kind of mega theme within the film is that challenging of the established ways of doing things and pushing against the accepted norms. Throughout the movie, you get people pushing back against this kind of radical idea. And when you look at the scouts early in the film and some of the stuff they're saying, like they're judging whether or not to bring players in based on how attractive their wives are and how much that says about their confidence. So they're so old school. Like one of them actually says he passes the eye candy test.
Yeah.
Which is a bizarre way to go about it. But yeah, the experts were very much undermined by this new thought of, rather than looking at, star power and attractiveness and sellability, it becomes more about this idea of buying runs, because runs lead to wins and wins lead to success, which is a totally contradictory approach, isn't it? In any sport, really, at that point.
Yeah, and it hasn't lasted in a sense. There was a bit of a flash in the pan moment for this team, and this movie covers that little stretch in history, and it stars Brad Pitt. The story hinges around this general manager character who's an ex-player who has to really lead this franchise through, and he kind of drafts in another sort of analyst who's hilariously not athletic but very obviously bookish and really keen on his numbers, and so the whole thing kind of hinges around that character and that story, and how he ultimately kind of brings them through to some degree of victory, and he kind of gets vindicated. But man, Brad Pitt is really he's the vehicle, he's the one that's sort of pulling you through this story, and he carries this movie, on his shoulders really, as much as the rest of the cast are awesome. This is a big Brad Pitt movie.
Yeah, it almost seems like it goes without saying. But as I was sat there watching it, I was like, he is so watchable. And it's not just that he's ridiculously good looking. It's just, you warm to him. He's very good at getting you to buy into the people he's playing. And I thought we could probably just circle back to a bit of the context of this film and have a look at some of the films he'd made in the run-up to this.
Yeah, go for it.
So, in the same year as this film, he was in Tree of Life, and they were both actually Oscar nominated for Best Picture, and he was a producer on both. Then 2 years before was Inglourious. Year before that, Benjamin Button in 2008. Year before that, Assassination of Jesse James. Year before that, Babel. 2 years before that, Troy. And then a smattering of Ocean's films in between. So he had a decade of very, very good movies. Where
it's a good run.
He really was trying to step away more and more from any sense of, being poster boy. I mean, he'd already done Snatch and Fight Club before that as well. So he's sought so hard to not be pigeonholed as an actor. Now, since this movie, it's been a little hit and miss at points, but he's still making great movies, and obviously he's not long off the back of an Oscar win for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So yeah, 2011, the same year, as I said, The Tree of Life. The Artist came out that year. Warhorse, The Help, Midnight in Paris, and these were all the films that were up for Oscars for 2012 off the back of it. Mm-hmm. And we talked last week about Road to Perdition and how we thought it might have gone under the radar as visual effects were becoming more of a thing that the audience wanted. And what struck me in the films that came out this year was none of them are really big visual effects films. So, even half a decade after, Road to Perdition that we looked at last week, well, closer to a decade actually, mm-hmm. there's a lot less of that in the mix.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, this is that infamous year that the Artist picked up all these awards.
Did you see it? About.
Shame to say, I still haven't watched it.
Same. Nothing in me wants to.
But it's funny when you read around this movie and Brad Pitt and this era. I think the thing that comes through, and I've seen it so many times, is that a lot of articles and film critics genuinely hail this as Brad Pitt's best performance. This role in Moneyball, and I think people did know about it, and it made a splash, and it got Oscar. I think it was 6 nominations, maybe 6 or 7, although it didn't win anything. But I wonder whether it got missed in part because it's about baseball, and it's about a sport, and so immediately, if you're not into that, if you don't understand it, you're gonna perhaps just stay away from it.
Yeah, you've got the fact that it's about baseball, and then it's not clearly about baseball because of the title, and that might have had an effect. If Field of Dreams had never happened and this was called Field of Dreams, it might have got a bit more attention. And it's probably worth saying that every film we discuss as an unmissable movie that might have been missed, it might not have been missed at the time where it came out, but it might be a film that just hasn't really gone on to have the acclaim we think it probably should have. I think that's fair to say. So yeah, jumping back into the cast at the time, Jonah Hill, going into this movie, was very much a comedy actor. He'd been in Get Him to the Greek with Russell Brand. I've never seen it, don't desire to, but that's the sort of film he was doing. So this was a bit of a departure for him. And he also then, 2 years after, went on to co-star in Wolf of Wall Street, had Academy Award nomination for this film, and
it's like he became the sidekick to these
megastars,
to Brad and Leo.
Maybe he put a good word into each other. Like, Brad wants to work with you, Leo wants to work with you.
Well, but he shows up in this film. My goodness,
yeah.
He's so good in this movie, and I think some of the best dialogue, the most potent moments, the sort of the realism in the film is down to things that he does and says. He's so natural on screen, it's just awesome.
Yeah. His relationship with Billy Bean. So his character is Peter Brand, but the actual guy in real life is called Paul DiPodesta. But he didn't want his name used, so they went for Peter Brand. And
that's a definite departure, Peter Brand.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, the chemistry between them is really strong, isn't it? And there was a moment on the special features where I think it's the last scene where they're looking at that guy who hit a home run and didn't realize. And Brad Pitt's... There's literally 3 minutes of Brad Pitt just in hysterics. And you kind of get the sense that they had a fun time working together on this film. So after him is Philip Seymour Hoffman. So he was pretty established by this point, wasn't he? Capote.
Yeah,
his role in Mission Impossible 3 was just brilliant,
pretty memorable
in every way. Yeah.
He kind of elevates that movie.
Oh yeah, legitimizes that franchise so much. But then you had ups and downs. So ups being Doubt was a decent movie. Lows being The Boat That Rocked, which I didn't particularly enjoy. This film, of course, had a fairly unknown Chris Pratt at the time. He was told he didn't actually get the role, and he was told he was too fat for it.
Wow.
True. Yeah, so he went away and lost like 30 pounds.
That crazy.
Plus for that role. So before this, he'd cropped up in a few things. He was in the OC.
Yeah, I remember that.
Parks and Recreation, obviously. He was in Wanted, the film with James McAvoy and Angelina Jolie. But this was probably the first thing where he had started, I guess, veering towards, the actor he is today as a leading man. So that's kind of the cast. And then you've got like Robin Wright as his ex-wife and a smattering of other known names. Mm-hmm. But it's a solid lineup, isn't it?
So good. This Aaron Sorkin's involved in this movie, and I'm just such a huge fan of his whole style. His vibe and that realism and the way that the dialogue, especially, just kind of it just has a
pings.
Yeah, totally. It's
got
sizzles.
pizzazz.
It does. And I
When's
think
the last time you heard
they
the
just
word pizzazz
managed
before this?
1994. And this cast just manages to do what you're supposed to do with Sorkin dialogue, and so
Did
like
you
I
ever
was thinking,
see Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip?
yeah, I did. Yeah, that
It was
was
the thing Matthew Perry did.
Like after West Wing.
Yeah, and that was Sorkin, and I loved that. There was only one season, and it got cancelled, and I loved it. But the dialogue was almost like everyone was super witty and super clever, and so it was almost over Sorkin. But in this film, you don't get that at all. It's just perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that combination, and I think I just love the realism in this film, and some of my favorite scenes are where that whole sort of ethos of movie making is really on display, and we can get into some of that as we carry on.
The director Bennett Miller hasn't actually directed many well-known films at all. That many films in period. In fact, he directed Capote, Foxcatcher, and this, and then a few kind of ads and trailers, but those are the kind of main films he's done. But what's phenomenal is from those 3 films, he's directed 2 actors from each of them to Oscar nominations, which is quite impressive. So Philip Seymour Hoffman and Catherine, I think it's Kinnear for Capote. Both Pitt and Hill were nominated for this movie, and Steve Carell and Mark Ruffalo were nominated for Foxcatcher. So he's obviously got something about him where he's good at getting performances out of his actors. And I think he does a really good job overall, and the dialogue obviously helps this, but at no point in the film is the concept of Moneyball lost on you. You get it, and he explains it in a way that it's tangible, and I guess Brad Pitt's character is us, isn't he? So he's the one having all this information explained to him. So I just think he does a really good job in that. And again, in the special features, the real Billy Bean is talking about Moneyball as a concept, and in like 30 seconds, you're a little bit lost, and it shows how good a job the director and the rest of the crew did at getting this notion across. So Sam, within this movie, what are the scenes that really kind of stood out for you?
I think the first one that like hits is the scene where Brad Pitt, Billy Bean has hired Jonah Hill to join him. It's kind of the two of them against the establishment, and then they go into this back room, and Peter Brand, Jonah Hill, starts to kind of unlock and unload his sort of grand theory, and we're let in on that moment as he starts to talk, and the music. It feels like the first music cue of the film, even though there's a few moments of music, particularly in the Billy Bean flashbacks. But the first, when Peter Brand walks down that long kind of corridor and that guitar cue hits, it feels like the first moment of music in the film. And from
those
there,
3 notes, yeah,
it's like really simple guitar thing. It feels very like Social Network-esque. Just the atmosphere of some of those moments.
Yeah, it reminded me of moments within Brokeback Mountain, some of the little guitar moments in that score as well.
Yeah.
Very subtle.
Yeah. And so then there's a scene that comes right after that where the music starts to build and he starts to go into the maths, and then he launches into this kind of really the whole theme of the film and the way that they're going to transform this team. And he says, Billy, this is Chad Bradford. He's one of the most undervalued players in baseball, and his defect is that he throws funny, and hey, this guy could be one of the best pitchers, not just in our bullpen but in all of baseball. And then it kind of cuts and the music stops dead, and it's the first scene that you kind of go, wow, this is just such a brilliant composite of filmmaking all coming together, and I'm hooked at this point.
You're in for the ride.
So I love
point,
that movie.
You?
Totally, yeah. And then kind of the next scene that sticks out, actually funnily enough, is the very next one after we, the audience, have been just kind of won over just seconds before, we now have to sit and watch Billy Bean's attempt to convince kind of Art Howe, the coach, and the old scouts. And so they all sit down around this table, and Billy has this confrontation with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
And Grady Fuson, who's I think the head scout as well.
The head scout. Yeah. Man, he plays such a that guy. You just want him out as soon as possible.
You do, yeah.
But Philip Seymour Hoffman too. He's so kind of. I mean, you wish there was more of him in the film, but he so underplays this part. Like, it feels like genius. It's a touch of seasoned actor genius, the way he inhabits that role.
Yeah.
But the very next scene, I love it. You know, there's that that conversation between all the old scouts, and again, there's the dialogue, and Brad Pitt just shines through that scene. And then the other scene, maybe I'm treading on all your favorite scenes, but the other scene I love is the scene on the draft deadline day, where
the back and forth in the office.
Oh my goodness, it feels like they're riffing, and it's so real, and they manage to. It just doesn't feel like you're watching two actors. It feels like you're watching two people working for a baseball organization.
Totally, yeah.
It's such a real exchange. You know, it's just got all that charm and energy between the two, the charisma between the two performers.
So this is where he's kind of playing off other clubs against each other, and basically trying to put all his chess pieces in the right place, getting rid of some players, bringing in others. And yeah, you got that sense that he's got a very clear goal of what he wants. And the energy in that scene is fantastic, because you wouldn't be surprised if Jonah Hill and Brad Pitt had just necked a couple of cans of Red Bull before that scene, because they're just so as it progresses and they get closer to what they want, you know, put him on hold, bring him back. It's like this back and forth. And eventually they get what they want, and the immortalized Jonah Hill GIF moment of the kind of slow fist pump.
Yeah, that's two actors like absolutely in the zone. Like they're just flying, you know, at that point. And man, is it just me, or has Brad Pitt, is Food like a recurring Brad Pitt acting partner?
It really is, yeah. Because
it's the same. It's exactly the same in this movie, and I love in that scene, like where he's scoffing popcorn in the gaps, and then spitting popcorn out before the phone rings, and all that stuff. That is such an entertaining scene where everything's starting to come together. The plot, the characters, their relationship, the team is starting to take shape. His leadership is like growing in confidence, and it's just such a great scene.
It's one of those, once you see a actor trait like that, you can't unsee it, because Brad Pitt's character Billy Bean is scoffing as he walks out of Scott Hattenberg, Chris Pratt's character's house.
Is he? What is he eating?
Films. He's just like chomping on a piece of bread or something as he leaves, or they offer him something and he goes out eating it.
Ocean's 11, the whole movie he's holding a burger or a sandwich or a Subway or something.
Makes you hungry. But it's hard to unsee those things. It's like Harrison Ford points at someone in every film, and once you know it, it's really hard to not just see it. It's constantly pointing at people. Some of the scenes for me, I think I had that in my head, that kind of deadline day energy. I think the scene that leads where it ultimately lands on their 20th victory in a row is done so well, because the music and the way it's filmed and everything about it just makes you think they're going to fail. So Billy hasn't, as he never does, hasn't gone to the game, and his daughter calls him and says, "Dad, you have to go back." And his daughter is like, to that character, he's like his world. She's his world. Yeah. And so he turns around and goes to the game, and as soon as he arrives, things start declining, and I think they're 11 ahead, and it goes to 11 all, and then suddenly they throw in Scott Hattenberg, and you think
they finally do the thing that he wanted them to do all along.
Yeah,
so good.
And
that's real. That really happened. That's
yeah,
an actual game that happened. And yeah, I love that scene. The blending of kind of that really stylized, because it's that blend of like real footage from the real game blended with those really stylized shots of the stadium. There's the floodlights, and it just feels really romantic. And he's inside the dugout. I love that moment when the ball comes off his bat and he looks up.
The ping as
he's
well.
Like, wait. Yeah, he knows just from the sound.
Yeah,
that's a home run. And he kind of gets up off his chair and looks, and you realize, okay, they've broken this world record. And as the ball lands in the stands, the music like sort of fully explodes. Such a great scene.
One of the benefits of having such a minimal score up till that point, at least, and I was even going to make a joke about it and learn those 3 notes on the guitar. And when I say learn, pick them out and say I've learned 90% of the score.
Yeah,
because it's so minimal. But at that point, when the music swells as they finally reach their, goal of getting to 20 games, it's so much more effective because you haven't had that throughout the movie, and it makes it so emotional.
It's not like a John Williams kind of emotional. It stays within the atmosphere and the ambience of the movie, yet, I think the music serves this film really, really well.
Yeah, agreed.
So what about just any other top shots?
I mentioned it earlier, and this is probably the best moment lighting wise for me, when it's pitch black outside and it's his silhouette and just a little bit of light in between him and whatever's behind him, and it just looks fantastic. And then he does these figure of 8 things, and then at the end of the movie when he's in his truck and it's like super shaky camera work, but it again, it just works. I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? Because you feel like everything has settled from a narrative point of view, but you've got this shaky camera work which kind of puts you in flux a little bit.
Then there's right after there's that peaceful scene where they're sitting at the table after he's decided not to take this like amazing GM job at a huge franchise in the Red Sox. And you get this last little great moment between Jonah Hill and Brad Pitt, and they kind of end where they started, with this look at a video of a player, and it sort of concludes with the same thing. This guy completely overlooked, had no idea. He's so used to being overlooked that he has no idea that he's actually hit the ball way out of the stands, and they're all shouting at him to keep running. It's so good. So
it's a really good payoff, because the scouts accuse Billy Beane of pursuing Moneyball as a concept because they say it's because scouts got it wrong with you. So they're basically saying you're angry with the system, and that's your motivation to change it. So all throughout the film, he's wanting to change baseball. He says it's an unfair game, and he's wanting to change it. So this is the first point where he really believes he's done something significant. So it's a really sweet moment within the film.
So Brad Pitt, let's just quickly expand a little bit on just how damn good he is in this film, and why you think that is. I mean, I think one of the things that's on display here is just some of that kind of explosive, when he's on his own in the car, you see him really let off, some of the full range of emotion. I love that about this film, but there's also, just that kind of weathered leader, trying to pivot between what he really believes is the future and these old scouts. I think some of the best moments in this film in terms of dialogue are ones where he is really just having to plead his case and kind of press through, and he kind of loses his cool. And
this is a baseball movie ultimately, but themes like conflict in the workplace are pretty universal. So most people know what it is to want to change a system or improve things or change the direction and have a bit of vision for where you're going, and to have people fight back against that with, the scouts aren't even fighting for something that's working. What they're doing isn't working, but they're still so stuck in their ways that they accuse him of just derailing the entire team. I think Art says, "You're killing this team." And obviously the main scout, Grady, has a word with him and gets pretty animated. And you get that moment where he's like, "I'm not going to fire you, Grady." And then he tells him to go F himself,
where to
basically.
go.
Now I will.
Yeah, now I'm going to fire you. Love it. So yeah,
again,
this is such a great film if you feel like you need to see, like, in terms of themes, we'll touch just quickly, like leveraging limitations, decisiveness, just leadership. Like, there's just some great leadership moments in this film, even as he's trying to bring through Peter Brand, and make him more confident. He forces him to cut somebody. And just the whole time, I feel like when I'm watching this film, I'm like, man, I'm learning leadership lessons.
I know.
About how to deal with people, and how to, if you really understand what you're doing and you believe in it, and clarity of vision, and that, I love that line. It's a problem that you think we have to explain ourselves, So I just love, I love some of the themes in this film, and it's an uplifting film, I think, because, it champions these things. It sort of portrays, and it's not cheesy at all, but it portrays, healthy human process and working through like the real stuff, like when he goes to visit his ex-wife and there's that like incredibly awkward conversation between him and her new husband, and I mean, that's one of the most real moments in any film I've ever seen, when Spike Jonze, who plays the husband, he kind of like trips over a word or two, and it's like, man, this is a movie. I'm watching people act, but it's so real. It's so brilliantly done.
And when he opens the door, he's like, "We can discuss it if you want." And he's like, and Brad Pitt says, her mum and dad will discuss it. It's like, ugh. And he just doesn't come back at it. It's just so awkward.
But there's that kind of there's those kind of themes about parenting and marriage and work and success and failure and calling, and
for thousands of people who would be in whatever sport, be it predominantly football here or baseball over across the pond, there are thousands of people who are told they're potential superstars when they're young and have money thrown at them, and young people and sporting disappointments huge, and people live with this stuff their entire lives. But in the context of football, I'm a Manchester United supporter, and there's loads of players where they came in as youngsters and you thought they were going to go on to be the best player in the world, and they just don't develop past their potential. And again, that's pretty universal. There's stuff, most people have a hobby when they're young, guitar, ballet, in your case, line dancing.
I told you not to let that out of the bag.
But yeah, we all have things where we think we're going to be a great success, and then it doesn't happen, and we might choose a path in life that's in a similar area like Billy Bean does, by becoming a scout and then progressing to GM, and carrying disappointment and how you deal with that. And it's something we all relate to. And I think Billy's drive to, he doesn't care about ruffling up feathers. He'll fire people. He'll, when Art Howe plays the player, he tells him not to play. He just trades him out. He's so
I love when he goes into that office and he's like, he speaks to some guy who's like an office staff guy for the Oakland A's, and he's like, "Hey, you've never played baseball before, right?" And he's like, "No." And he's like, "Okay, you're the new head scout."
Yeah.
So determined and ruthless is he just to totally dismantle this old system to prove his point, that he kind of goes on this warpath. But it comes good, and
Yeah.
like every good sports movie, there's a montage. There's a sports movie montage in this film, and it's it's not of necessarily the classic Rocky running up the stairs thing, but you're actually seeing Billy Beane growing in confidence as a leader, and you see him going through and having one-on-ones with players, and so that's what the movie montage is in this film. But it never completely departs from the kind of the real the ups and downs. Like even just a few moments after that big record-breaking 20th game win, like just minutes later, there's like the deflation of them being caught out in the World Series.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, it came to nothing. And actually, pretty quickly after that, you then hear this radio interview about how they proved their point, but ultimately long term it was never going to revolutionize baseball. We're not suddenly all moving to sabermetrics and math to build teams.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a realism that comes flooding back in pretty quickly, and you end the movie really, again, just dealing with the backstage of his life and the relationship between him and his daughter.
Yeah.
So any problems with this film, Steve? Any things that you just thought, if I'm going to be really scrupulous, they could have done away with?
Scrupulous? Have you been reading the Thesaurus again, Sam?
This podcast is just my opportunity to say long, poxy words.
Only just is this a problem, but I think that there is a slight issue with pacing. I think you could probably shave another 10 minutes. I think it's 2 hours 15, give or take.
Okay.
But I think they could have shaved 10, 15 minutes off it if they really wanted to. I mean, there was the scene. So Billy Beane in real life was actually remarried, and for the entire course of this point in his life, and throughout the film he's got a wedding ring on, which kind of shows that, because he's still wearing a wedding ring, but you kind of assume that he's still wearing from his past marriage, but he is remarried. And they actually had a scene with him and his current wife Tara, and you totally see why they took it out. It's just them at the restaurant, and Billy's just basically bemoaning the scouts and the problem with baseball, and it doesn't really add anything. Mm-hmm. So I think they did try to trim it down where they could. I felt for the woman who played his wife, because can you imagine that actress? Yeah, I'm playing Brad Pitt's wife in a movie. Whatever. They cut my
yeah,
what?
Shame.
They cut my one.
Shame.
Oh. She may well have had a big glass of gin that night when she found that out.
So for me, the main problem I wondered about was, because this film has such realism in this movie, and yet it's carried by Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill, who are clearly acting. They're operating in their craft, as two actors, and you get the sense that there are some of the supporting actors in this film. Like, there's one or two of them where I'm wondering, like, is this even the real owner of the Cleveland Indians? Because he's coming over so almost like wooden, like too real.
Yeah.
You know, some of the scouts, that they're character actors, and one or two of them, I'm like, is this a real baseball scout that they asked just to sit in and say a couple of lines?
No, they did. They did, Sam.
So they did.
I read that.
And and you can kind of tell, and I don't know, some of that feels good and works, but maybe some of it doesn't, and some of it's a little bit jarring. There's a couple of moments, there's that one. I mean, he seems lovely, but there's that old guy that's like, one of the scouts, and he's like, Billy, remember, he doesn't answer to us. He answers to the owner and to God, and I'm like watching it, going, I think this is a real old scout, not an actor in a movie, and it's kind of cool, but for me, it takes me out. It takes me out a couple of times.
Why is it the first two films we've reviewed have had secondary background actors likening major characters to God in an act of defiance? Is
Well,
that our niche?
we must make sure we find all the other movies that do exactly that.
So, is it worth, Sam, before we wrap up, shall we look at some of the best lines of dialogue? Because you thought Jonah Hill has most of the best lines. I would actually say I think Billy Bean has got all of the best lines.
Okay.
So, for me,
Sock it to me.
the lines I loved are, and these are so Sorkin, but as I've said before, they never feel forced or a bid to over intellectualize the movie. But some of the great Billy Bean lines: "I hate losing more than I even want to win." I
Yeah.
so get that. As quite a competitive person, I really love winning, but I hate losing more, whether it's my team or I'm playing in something. So that's a great line. I love when he's explaining the issues within baseball, and he says, there are rich teams and there are poor teams, then there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. Another great...
Yeah, that whole scene is packed with great dialogue.
Yeah. What else is there? Oh, there's the moment where he has that really difficult conversation with Art Howe, and then he just says, every time we talk, I'm reinvigorated by my love of the game. And it just walks off. So disingenuous.
I love some of the scenes between, obviously, Jonah Hill and Brad Pitt. That first scene where he calls him up on the phone, and it kind of sets the tone for the kind of the honesty and the ruthlessness. And he's like, hey, what time is it? I don't know. And he says, would you have drafted me in the first round? And he's like, what? And he says, after we talked, you looked me up. Would you have drafted me in the first round? And he's like, yeah, I did. You were pretty good. And Billy Bean says, cut the crap, Pete. Would you have drafted me in the first round? And then he like, it's honesty moment. I would have picked you in the 9th round. No signing bonus. I think that would have convinced you to accept that scholarship. And then there's a pause. Pack your bags, Pete. I just bought you from the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, that's so good.
So good.
Yeah. Another great line I thought, I'm going to apply this to my life, is when you get the answer you want, hang up. That's a great mantra for life.
Oh, I've used it's a problem that you think we have to explain ourselves. I've used that on myself so many times. And the other one I love is when they're talking about how best to fire someone. Would you rather get 1 shot in the head or 5 in the chest and bleed to death?
Yeah.
Are those my only 2 options?
Yeah, that's a great line. So it's littered with fantastic dialogue, totally believable. And like I said, in some of his other work, it feels too clever for its own good. But in this movie, it's just so well written. As I said before, the concepts, what could be quite a difficult thing to get your head around, never feels it at all. And yeah, it's right up there with some of the best lines in cinema history, if you'll allow me to be so bold.
That is bold. But
I'm not sure I'll believe that when I wake up tomorrow, but right now I'm owning it.
Yeah, why not? It is a delicate cocktail, this business of pulling it all together to make a great film. And for us, Moneyball is a must-watch. And so if you have seen it already, hope this has helped you realize why you enjoyed it. And if you haven't, put this on your watch list right now. I bought it from Amazon Prime. It's on there. But yeah, this is a unmissable movie that you really must see.
Absolutely. And if you're in the UK, it's on Netflix, and most people have Netflix.
What?
So it's on Netflix over here. I watched the whole thing. I got up off my sofa, looked through my DVD collection, had to find it, open the case, pick out the disc, put it in the DVD player, close the disc, wait for it to load. I did all this, watched the whole thing, and the back was like, it's on Netflix, isn't it?
Amazing.
But I got the special features, which was a big plus. So it's a fantastic movie, and it's kind of one that some people who saw it know it's great, but if you haven't, it's so worth watching, and we couldn't recommend it more. So that concludes our breakdown of Moneyball. Check it out, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll be with you next week for another unmissable movie. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that, don't forget to click the like button. You can share this with your friends on Twitter and Facebook, TikTok probably. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about all our latest videos. And finally, if you're able to support the channel, please do follow the Patreon link in the video description. You'll get a load of bonus content from outtakes to shoutouts and a bunch of other stuff. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.